I misspoke the last time. I said that Rita Dove was the second poet laureate, black poet laureate of the United States. Actually, she was the first black poet laureate of the United States. She was born in 1952, which makes me her elder. Actually, she was the second black poet to win the Pulitzer Prize. That's what I meant. The first black poet to win the Pulitzer Prize was Gwendolyn Brooks. Any other board announcements?
I'm making this announcement now while we probably have the most people and the most people watching. I would like to thank State Representative Matt McQueen. He has one school district or one school within his area that he represents, El Dorado. And so if the governor approves the special capital outlay, he is going to provide security locks to all the classrooms in El Dorado. So with what has happened over the past week, I think that's noteworthy. So all my people in El Dorado that aren't here but are watching, when you see Representative Matt McQueen, please thank him for that, and hopefully we'll be able to take care of the rest of the school district with other monies.
Any other board announcements? Board Member Carrillo?
Just a nice, I was thinking that Willie would be here tonight. A nice big shout out to Isaiah Martinez, state champion wrestler, Santa Fe High School. So way to go. And the Santa Fe team overall. It's huge. Yeah. And that's all. And for anyone coming up, this weekend is district championship games starting tonight, actually, at Santa Fe High, going through the next 5 nights, and depending on where we win and lose, there's going to be always a basketball game to go to for the next probably 5 nights.
I listen to it on the radio. Yeah. Any other board announcements?
Just really quick, Board President. Also, just Board Member Cashman brought up the security locks throughout the schools. Just actually like to give kudos to the state legislature because they actually did appropriate roughly $40 million for security locks throughout the public schools in the state of New Mexico. So how we tap into that and how we go about doing that, we'll have to see, but that's also another good kudos for the state legislature as well.
Any other board announcements? All right, we move into superintendent announcements. Superintendent?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. It gives me great pleasure this evening to introduce to all of you the Santa Fe High School Intermediate Advanced Guitar Group. They will be performing 2 pieces this evening under the direction of Pablo Champion. Caprice number 13 by Luigi Lanani, arranged by Jeremy Osborne, and then their second piece will be Tango number 2 by Matthew Hensley.
Job well done. Thank you very much. Let's give them another round of applause. Thank you so very much. Hard to do with guitar in hand. Yes, Tina.
I wanted him to sit closer over here, but oh well. Oh well, he's closer to the mic. May I, Madam President?
Please.
Out-of-state travel, Santa Fe High School and J. ROTC to Camp Harry, Ohio. Air rifle teams will compete in the all-service J. ROTC National Championship during spring break, March 21st to the 25th. The district is covering up to $500 per student. 9 cadets and 1 instructor are traveling. Lodging will be paid for by the U.S. Navy. Also, Santa Fe High School and J. ROTC to San Diego, California for their military orientation trip during spring break, March 17th through the 23rd. 44 cadets and 1 instructor traveling. There will be no cost to the district. And then at this time, we have lots of really great news, and you know, the good news coming out of our J. ROTC program, marksmanship, just continues. And tonight we have some special announcements and certificates. So I'm going to announce them all, and then I'm going to ask the Commander, Craig Stapleton, to come forward and the team, and we have certificates. And Mr. Grindler's going to take pictures with us and the board. So let me announce them, and then when you come up, we'll give you your certificates. So you might want to stand when I call your name. And then if I call your name a second time, you might want to wave, so we know that you were recognized more than once, okay? So Santa Fe High National Junior ROTC Navy, sent 3 teams to Phoenix to compete in the Navy National Marksmanship Championship. Only the top 21 Navy teams for an original, ready for this number, 641 teams qualified for the national competition. It is unprecedented for a school to have 3 teams qualify. Our teams finished 1st, 3rd, and 17th. Our 1st and 3rd place teams will represent Santa Fe Public Schools at the All-Service Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines National Championship next month in Ohio, the trip that I just announced, to compete against the top 27 teams. Isn't that amazing? Let's just give them a round of applause for that. So Santa Fe had 4 cadets in the top with the following results. And so when I call your name, just stand. Dominic Cordova, 3rd. Gabe Gonzalez, 4th. Elena, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Molina, 5th. Biani Nunez, 6th. And Joab Gonzalez, 9th. The first place national championship team, Gabe Gonzalez, Joab Gonzalez, Elena Molina, and Ariana Holmes. And then the 3rd place team, Angelica Segovia, Biani Velasquez Nunez, Dominic Cordova, and Marcus Fernandez. Let's give them all a wild round of applause. So the board is going to come down, and we will give you your certificates and take a photo with you. We're so proud of you.
Just really quick, if the parents want to come down and mingle around here and take pictures and do whatever, you guys are free to welcome to do that.
Wow, look at that trophy, my goodness.
You got a place, so Dr. Garcia, we will be happy to leave you here for a couple of weeks. Yes. You got a loan dancer.
Dominic Scordo. Very proud of you, Gabe Gonzalez. Elena Molina. She is. Kiani. Here, might pronounce your name right. Yes. I did. The last name is okay. Joab Gonzalez. Juliana Combs. Sean Cordova. Marcus Fernandez. Did I get everyone? Okay. So hopefully, can you help position us so that we can see all the board and the team? I'm a little short, so I'm going to have to do between.
See if I can pull the trigger on a good picture. All right. 1, 2, 3. A little tighter in if you can. Right? Just a little tighter. So there's a little bigger picture. All right. 1, 2, 3. Let's get that trophy.
Yeah. That's something.
Good. 1, 2, 3. All right.
And before
No,
we,
one more. 1, 2, 3.
before we break,
Yes. So, no, this is Master Chief Mays. He's actually the air rifle coach. So he's the one responsible for getting these kids to the grade level that they're at. Real quick, Dr. Garcia, I really want to give a big thanks to you, the board members, and Mr. Bruno for just all the support that you give. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. We're going to leave this with you for a while.
all right.
Where do you want us to place that from now on?
So I guess what we can do is to, we can probably place it up here on this table. Maybe as people.
Well, yeah, we'll set aside. We're supposed to get the high picture, our plans. Here's Detroit, here's Cleveland, that's right there on the wall. I've never been there. There you go. So you guys have a great time. Take care.
I would just like to say something before you guys all disappear. If you can hold off for a second.
Said if you can go ahead and get the script that
I guess go ahead.
you read about the students. Is it-
I would actually like to give congratulations to the team. You guys did an excellent job. I never really realized what ROTC works and how ROTC works until, I guess you could call her my stepdaughter. I know this little girl that's 3 years old, and she's actually a yuck now at West Point, and she's a junior at West Point. So I totally can relate to what you guys do and how you guys do it, and you guys should actually be very proud of yourselves. I'd like to give a special congratulations to a couple of families that I've known for 25 years plus, the Fernandezes. Congratulations on your child, as well as Gabe Gonzalez and his wife. Gabe's actually a major with our Sheriff's Department, so thank you for your services and thank you for what you do, and congratulations.
I also want to announce that on February the 22nd at 9 a.m. here at the ESC, we'll have our tribal consultation meeting. And so hopefully, I think some of the board have already RSVP'd that they will be in attendance. And also, just to let you know that the Sky Center had their open house. It took place on February 13th at 3:30. Again, thank you to the board and to Christy and your team. A beautiful site, and I think it was a great example of public-private partnerships and the board and administration and the Sky Center working together to come to an amicable resolution around space. So kudos to everybody. And then just a friendly reminder that the Santa Fe Public Schools Music Faculty and Friends Cabaret Fundraiser was this Saturday, February the 24th at 7 p.m. at the Lodge at Santa Fe in the Maria Benitez Cabaret Theater at 750 North St. Francis Drive. Hear Broadway tunes, piano solos, operatic arias, jazz, folk music, pop tunes, finger food, full dinners, dessert and drinks, seating and dining available beginning at 5:30 this Saturday. Should be a fun event. And that concludes my announcements.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. Mr. Grumler, do we have anyone for public forum?
Good evening, Board President Price, members of the Board, Superintendent Garcia. We have one speaker tonight, and I'll read the public forum ground rules. Please listen and speak with respect. No uncivil conduct will be permitted. Please do not discuss any specific student who is not your own. No sharing of time. Self-monitor and observe the 3-minute time limit. I'll give you a 30-second warning when your time is almost up. Public commentary and dialogue is allowed only during the public forum, not throughout the meeting. Please search for answers on common ground. You may speak on any topic, whether it's on the agenda or not. Your input will be taken into consideration. And finally, please be advised that the board may discuss your issue during the meeting, but by law, the board cannot take action on items that are not on the agenda. And our speaker tonight is Ms. Samantha Rainbow.
Hello, Samantha Rainbow, thank you. I'm a very nervous public speaker, but someone told me to speak my truth even if my voice shakes, so. My son, Choske, is a 7th grade student currently at Milagro Middle School. We are fairly new to the Santa Fe area, so it's the first time my son has ever gone to a large school like this. In light of all the school shootings that are happening across the country, my 12-year-old son asked me last week what to do if someone starts shooting in his school. And I didn't really know what to say. There are over 600 students at Milagro Middle School, and they all carry backpacks, as it's a space restriction thing for them. But they are unchecked every day at the front door, so all 600 plus students are carrying backpacks that are unchecked. I'm concerned about a safety issue concerning this. I'm not trying to speak for all Santa Fe schools, but directly about Milagro Middle School. And I would really like to see some kind of security measures used there. They had a bomb threat even there a few weeks ago, where a student had posted on social media that he was going to blow the school up. And if they hadn't discovered that before it happened, he could have easily brought a device in his backpack. I understand that the cost is always going to be an issue, but I would like some kind of security measures to be put into place there, be it metal detectors or the backpacks being checked, or even the students personally. Certainly not trying to turn the school into any type of prison, but I think the cost of us being proactive as parents is far better than an unforeseeable tragedy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There will be no union update tonight. Moving on to consent agenda. May I have a motion?
A second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. I can wait 1 second. 1,000. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? It passes. Is board update and follow-up. Is there any board update or follow-up? Moving on to superintendent update and follow-up.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. There were some questions about Amy Beal. There have been 2 families who have self-disclosed that they are not living in the attendance area, and they will be allowed to stay for the remainder of the year and be going to their designated school. We had 57% of the families provided 2 documents. We are now following up with the families that did not provide 2 documents. We have approved a purchase order for H&H Private Investigative Services, a CES-approved vendor with the state of New Mexico. We have a scope of work and expectations laid out in terms of following up on those that may not be living in the attendance area. The school provided us a list of students they suspect parents may be using incorrect addresses, and we anticipate to begin residency verifications next week. And then there was a question regarding...
So those 2 families that self-disclosed, how many children are we talking about?
I didn't have that number here.
All right, thank you.
Board Member Carrillo?
What's the expense of the firm that we're hiring to follow through on this for us?
$13,750.
Okay. And that's from operational, right?
Yes.
So for those people that are not telling the truth, that's money that comes right out of the classroom so that we can check up on you not telling the truth and going having your kids in your zone. $13,000, that pays, they're not paid very well, but that does pay for 1 EA for a year, okay? So that's what it comes down to when we have to do this. How many kids so far have we found that have not been living in the district, in the zone?
Right now, only 2 families that we know of for sure that have self-disclosed.
Because they're honestly.
Okay.
We don't, but we know that there are more.
Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you.
And then there was a question regarding the Conterra fiber optic
hold on
map.
a second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Board Member Garcia?
Superintendent, more or less in a nutshell, what's the scope of work that H&H are going to do? How are they going to go about doing that?
I would prefer not to say all of that publicly. I mean, because there will be different strategies that will be used to find families that perhaps are not living in the attendance zone. But it is in the scope of work, in terms of verifying where people are actually leaving to and from school. The Conterra fiber optic map was sent out to all board members via email. That was a request from the board. And that concludes my update and follow-up.
Thank you very much. Moving on to presentations, discussion, and possible action.
So our first presentation, and Mr. Grenler, is our lobbyist here today? Legislative lobbyist, Linda Siegel? Not quite yet. So I don't know if the board would like to move to, I don't know if you can, move to Turquoise Trail Charter School, or you want to go ahead with the legislative update?
Well, we pay for this.
She's coming, but she's running late.
Let's just move to Turquoise Trail Charter School presentation, and then when she comes, after that, we'll move back to the legislative update.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to present Mr. Floyd Trujillo, Governing Board Chair of Turquoise Trail Charter School, and he requested the opportunity to make a presentation to the board. So welcome, Mr. Trujillo.
Thank you for coming, Mr. Trujillo.
Thank you, President Price, members of the board, Superintendent Garcia. Thank you for granting me time to present today. As Dr. Garcia said, my name is Floyd J. Trujillo. I'm president of the Turquoise Trail Charter School Governance Council, and I would like to discuss the action taken related to TTCS, which, as I have previously stated, I believe is based on a misunderstanding of the current situation. So I do have a brief presentation. I did leave time for questions after, but if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to let me know. I'd like to briefly describe the current status of TTCS and then discuss some of the values that guide the school. And I'd also like to discuss the attempts at collaboration that the Governance Council has made over the years. We have several times tried to work with the board and administration in collaborative attempts. Finally, I'd like to discuss what I believe are shared goals of Santa Fe Public Schools and Turquoise Trail Charter School. So a few bullet points about Turquoise Trail. We're located, as you well know, in the south side of Santa Fe. Turquoise Trail Charter School is the oldest public charter school in New Mexico, serving approximately 500 pre-K through 6th grade students, with student demographics nearly identical to the Santa Fe Public School District. We're a charter school for more than 20 years, which continues to have strong ties to the community. And of our 500 students, almost all of them are within SFPS district, so they're almost all Santa Fe Public School District students. We're a Title I school with approximately 66% of our students receiving free or reduced lunch, and approximately 17% of our students speaking Spanish as a first language.
Excuse me, Mr. Trujillo. You said almost all of them are from within the Santa Fe Public School District. Can you tell me what other areas they come from?
President Price, members of the board, I can't tell you where they come from. I can't tell you right now where they come from exactly. I can tell you that there are approximately 15 students that are out of the district boundaries.
Thank you.
On the fourth bullet point, as I said, Title I school with approximately 66% of our students. That number varies from year to year, but it's generally between 66 and 70%. The school continues to maintain a 4-year grade of B from PED. We've continued that now going into the 5th year. And I would like to spend a little bit of time on the third bullet point there, because I think that's where the confusion really comes from. I know that the district has stated that the key issue for taking this action is overcrowding of the south side schools. However, if our students were not at TTCS, they would then have to attend Amyville, Pinon, or one of the other south side schools. As I said, these are all Santa Fe district students. If Turquoise Trail were not there, they would be attending Amyville, Pinon, one of the other south side schools. So I don't understand how displacing 500 students from Turquoise Trail would help overcrowding of the other schools in any way. Again, I think that this is kind of the key point, and really one of the ones that I'd like clarification from the district on, if we could. I'd also like to revisit the second bullet, just to again emphasize.
Excuse me a second.
Yes,
Vice President Cashman.
I'm sorry. I'm sure you have the information and would help the district. Out of the 500 students, what schools would they normally go to if they weren't going to the charter school? So, you know, and I know that a lot of them would normally go to Amyville, but where else on the south side, if you could tell us the school, their home school, and how many kids? I'm sure you have that in your databases someplace.
Board President Price, Member Cashman, I'm afraid I don't have that data. I'm not very well versed in the other district zones.
Board Member Carrillo.
Excuse me, I believe that's something we have, that through the ARC studies, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Yonda Wagner, where they, at one point they passed out to us where all the kids are going that would have been in this zone, where they're all going to school. I mean, we were given those elaborate spreadsheets that I think speak to that.
I think we need to work together on that with Turquoise Trail, because I'm not sure that we have all the data. We also have to recognize that when you created the boundary for Amyville, you took into account the kids who would have been in the old Turquoise Trail district. And so while it might appear that they would be going to Amyville, there are many that geographically live in that attendance area. So we're more than happy to work with you and to help identify, as you know, if you decide to move. I don't want to preempt your presentation by any means, but if you are going to work with us in that study, then we would work together to look at where the kids are.
Please continue.
Thank you. I also just wanted to kind of discuss the second bullet as well, to emphasize again the strong ties that the school has to the community. Turquoise Trail has been there as a charter school for more than 20 years. It's a relatively rural community, and again, very strong ties. The community has spent a good deal of time and effort in supporting the school, and the school has spent a lot of time in outreach, and again, the community feels very strongly about Turquoise Trail Charter School. I wanted to share this slide with you for two reasons. First, I have to say I'm very proud of the success of Turquoise Trail Charter School. Again, I know that I say this often, but it is because I'm so proud of it. Being the oldest charter school in the state, I feel, is quite an honor and something that we have worked very hard to continue to maintain, in addition to being a successful charter school. I also feel that the values that have led Turquoise Trail to be successful are values that are shared at the district level as well. Again, I firmly believe, and I've stated this several times, that Turquoise Trail Charter School and the Santa Fe School District are very much in line in terms of what we want to accomplish and what we want to do with our students. I believe our goals are the same and very much in line, and I believe that this slide shows some of the, again, the commonalities that we have. A little bit about governance and some of the collaboration attempts that we've made. As I said, I've been with Turquoise Trail for over 15 years, probably closer to 20, serving on the Governance Council for quite a while. The policy of Turquoise Trail Charter School, and again, I'm speaking to that as someone who's been here from nearly the beginning, has always been to seek collaboration with the district. That has always been one of our primary leading goals, something that we've worked very hard at. I do know that there are issues such as the lottery and enrollment cap, which board members have raised several times over the years. This is something that I have reached out to the district and to board members numerous times in terms of trying to meet with the district and the board to determine what we can do, what steps we can take to address some of these concerns. We have in the past had some successful collaborations with things such as transportation and food services. Those are no longer occurring as of a few years back, 3 years I believe. But again, it's a place where we have collaborated successfully in the past. Again, bottom line, my goal has always been to continue to work with the district in order to achieve our shared goal of providing Santa Fe students with the best education possible. One of the issues that I have brought up in the past is that it has been a bit of frustration from me to hear that some of these issues could be worked on. I have offered to take the lead in several of these issues. I've reached out to every superintendent over the last 15 years, several board members, in an attempt to collaborate. The lottery and enrollment cap is one that comes up every year, and again, I really feel that it's something that we could work through. I've offered to take the lead with board members. Again, I've received no follow-up response from the district, and this is going back more years than I can even really say. I have this slide up just again to show the vision and mission of the district as well as Turquoise Trail. I again continue to state that I strongly believe that we share the same goals and that we are working towards the same efforts. And again, I firmly believe that by collaborating, we can get much further than we can by having tensions or any of these other kind of disagreements. So, in conclusion, I'm very confident that if the district is willing to meet and collaborate with us, we can find a solution which will help us achieve our shared goals of providing the best education for Santa Fe's children. A solution which will build on, rather than attempt to tear down, a school with over 20 years of success and community support. With that, I am happy to stand for any questions that the district, or I'm sorry, that the board members may have.
Board Member Carrillo?
Mr. Trio, I have a series of questions, and Madam President, I have a series of questions. And my intent is not to be antagonistic, though it may seem that way. Okay? And and I'm not trying to be confrontational, but then I don't view asking for answers and to be confrontational. I just feel like it's dialogue. So I appreciate the presentation. I can only speak for myself, but in a way I don't think anyone, probably in even Santa Fe, questions the what a great school it is. questions that it's been a B, that's been around for a long time, that has very dedicated staff and students, and it's just an integral part of our community. And and thank you for, for reiterating that.
Board President Price, Member Creo, thank you.
What's missing from the presentation was the word lease, and everything that brought us to this point right now. I think it's very unfortunate that the New Mexican in their headline used the word evict, because that's such an explosive, incendiary, and provocative word. But I think it's just so important that the community understand that this isn't around an eviction, it's around a lease that's ending, and then our being partners in finding a new home. So first question really is, I understand on the side of collaboration to work through this challenge. But then when we talk about a history of collaboration, what I would have to ask is, why then did you go to become a state charter? Because many, I know, okay, no, I don't, why then did you go become a state charter?
Board President Price, Member Carrillo, there were many issues that went into that. I will say that one of the issues was, again, a lack of collaboration that we felt on the part of the district and the board. In fact, prior to that vote at the Turquoise Trail Governance Council level, I reached out several times to the then superintendent as well as to then board members. And in fact, a week prior, and as a follow-up, a week prior to us taking the vote, I emailed the entire board as well as the superintendent with our agenda and a note in the email stating that at this meeting we were going to be taking this action, inviting board members and district staff to attend. I received no response from anyone. The day before the meeting, I again followed up with an email asking if anyone would be interested in attending to discuss this with me. I again received no response. I don't feel that it would be a good use of time to lay out several of the details that went, or other details that went into that. I'm happy to if you would like, but again, that really was one of the primary driving forces.
Okay, thank you. And I can say that I didn't attend and I regret not, and I probably would say that I regret the following, if you will, the lead of admin, because my understanding then was we were counseled that sometimes boards should not get involved in certain things unless we can do so as a board. And so, okay, thank you for answering that forthrightly. I appreciate that. When you say that, when you were talking about boundaries, and the logic doesn't follow to me where you say these kids would have to go to Pinon, these different Pinon, Amy Beale, and these other schools, because if Turquoise Trail wasn't there. Turquoise Trail is there, and that's our building, and we spent $12 million renovating it. So whether it's called Turquoise Trail or not, the facility would be there, and then the facility would house all of our children that live within that zone that go as far out as Madrid. And so I don't understand your logic in saying that we'd be in the same position because TTCS would not be there.
President Price, Member Carrillo, two things there. First of all, as I said, I don't have the exact numbers on the different zones. However, the point there is that if the 500 students were not at Turquoise Trail Charter School, they would be at another Santa Fe public school. Again, I believe that most of them would be Southside schools because they're primarily Southside students. However, I also would have to kind of ask you again, based on that logic, if the 500 students would still be there, then to me that doesn't quite make sense, because after all, the 500 students are currently there. So displacing them, I don't understand how that would help.
So I would say that presupposes the school closing, from what I hear you saying, and nobody here, and there's never been any discussion of or intent to close the school. So I would imagine while there are, I don't know, maybe there's 150 or 200 kids that live within that area that may continue to stay at a school at that facility. TTCS is a good school. I would imagine that the balance are going to go to wherever we can find you a site. So they're going to, I don't know that they'll be spread out throughout Santa Fe elementaries right now. My sense is they would go to wherever Turquoise Trail ended up having a site. Wouldn't that make sense?
President Price, Board Member Creo, based on meetings that I have had with community and parents, I believe that nearly all of the students would continue to stay with Turquoise Trail Charter School, which again, to me, does not make sense in why the district would want to move those 500 students.
We don't want to move them. What we want to do more than anything is we need to have a place to have all of our kids that are off of Highway 14 and on the southwest sides, because all the information that we get from all the studies that are done, that's where the growth is happening, that's where there's kids, and that's why we have right now, we're having to do the secondary boundary at Pinon, we're having to do a cap at Amy Beale. We wouldn't have had to do any of those things if all of those kids in that zone were attending really the facility in their zone. So, and I would hope that, and I would say congratulations to you if, you know, all 500 said, we're staying with TTCS no matter where they go. I mean, that's outstanding. That would speak volumes as to your success. But I think that as a district, we also know that whatever school is going to open there, we're going to fill it. And we're probably going to fill it way sooner than we think we are. And then we're also going to be thinking about, okay, how are we going to, you know, cap there? Because we know what kind of development is going on that side of town.
President Price, Board Member Carrillo, the only thing I can say to your first point there is that, again, I am fully aware, having lived in that community and in Southside Santa Fe for more than 40 years, fully aware of the growth on that side of town, fully aware of the challenges there, but I find it very difficult to believe that the first step that the board and the district would take to solve these issues would be to displace 500 students at a successful school, as opposed to sitting down with Turquoise Trail and seeing if there was another solution which would benefit all of the students.
And again, I think you're assuming, because you used the word displace, you're assuming that there's not going to be another space for Turquoise Trail, when in fact, and I think in this 3-year period of time, even though we could very well end up having a facility in, you know, by June of 2021, something else you might find very desirable could easily open by then. So, and then I guess the final concern is, and it's got to be mentioned, that this is a lease. And all leases, just as the one I'm in right now personally with the condominium I live in, it's up at the end of April of this year, and they're selling it. They're selling all the condos there, and you know, they gave me a lot of notice, and I got to go, and unless I want to buy the whole thing. And but I think it's getting the emotions getting in the way of what is really black and white in terms of this is a lease that ends on this date. We need the property back, and we're going to do everything we can to be great partners in helping you find a new site, whether it's with us or someone else. But I don't like us being disparaged in the community when people are saying that we're not thinking about the children and that we're evicting all these children. And I'm really sorry that also I don't see anyone here from the Turquoise Trail community, which I find really odd, because generally when we have any school on an agenda, there are a lot of people that come just to support their school. But because that way, if there were more people here, more people could then understand the legality of this, that we're not some sort of evil empire trying to displace a school or close a school in any way, and that in fact we don't even have the ability to close a charter, especially your state charter. We could, you know, so I just, it's really important to me that the facts get out to the public, that they're not clouded by emotion. And then I think that once we're able to do all of that, then we can collaborate, as you say, to find solutions, especially on a new site.
Board President Price, Member Creo. So first of all, I do want to say that, again, in my presentation, you are correct, there was no mention of the lease. And the reason for that was because I spoke to the lease at the public forum. And again, I feel that that is, that I've already addressed that. Again, the lease was implemented, was created in 2009 as a result of a legislative change which allowed for reimbursement for lease monies. So the reason that that was put in place was so that Turquoise Trail would be eligible to receive lease reimbursement monies, which we could then turn over to the district. That was the pure intent of that lease. It never had anything to do with whether or not the charter school could stay there, which is obvious because prior to that, for over 15 years, the school was there with no lease. There is simply no lease requirement for a charter school to remain in a facility. That is black and white in the charter law. I didn't bring it up again. My presentation here, and the focus tonight for me was to determine where we can meet and collaborate. And I feel that that issue is one that we apparently do not agree on. But that is our take on it. The lease was never intended as a document that would state whether or not the charter school could stay or not in that facility. That is governed by charter law. And I apologize, if I could just follow up on the other. I did not want to assume, of course, I am representing over 350 families, over 500 students. I did not want to assume that I simply knew that how all of those, the community members and parents felt. We've taken several surveys. I've met with several community members, several parents. I have results of surveys here regarding this issue. I asked that I be given some time from our community to address the board and attempt to collaborate with them, rather than have over 200 parents here speaking in public forum and, distracting. This is my attempt to collaborate before we have to, before we move further on this. That is the reason that you do not see parents here.
I understand that the reason why, and this is concerning to me, because when I came on the board, you were a charter, but you didn't have an attendance boundary that limited, that was new. That happened after I came on the board, where the attendance boundary, where there became, well, no, let me rephrase that. Where you became a charter where you didn't have to accept people within the previous attendance boundary. And what happened for us is that meant a lot of kids, if they didn't get in the lottery, were not able to go to that school. Okay, so that's what really changed. Yeah, you were there. Okay, but it almost sounds like you're saying that when you had a lease, you, regardless of the fact that it had 2 end dates, one and then we renewed, that somehow you got the idea that you had this property forever, in perpetuity. Is that the case?
President Price, Board Member Creo, again, the charter law is very clear on that. There is no requirement for a lease for a charter school to be in a facility.
Right. Our counsel's here, and he can answer that later, but that's not how we read the charter law, and certainly it's not how we read laws related to leases. We're obligated to find you a space, if we have a space available, and to offer it to you all first.
Could you repeat what you said about the attendance boundary changing?
Before, and Chrissy, you would have been with the, I'm sorry, Superintendent, if I can address Chrissy. Before, I don't know the date at which this happened, but Turquoise Trail, while being a charter, accepted all of the children first within the boundary, the zone of the school. And it was later that Turquoise Trail became a charter that lotteried kids in. And when that happened, we had a lot of our kids within the zone that were pretty much lotteried out. So someone correct me if I'm wrong here, but that's clearly how I understand the progression.
President Price, Board Member Creo, you're correct with the exception of this was not specific to Turquoise Trail. The charter law in New Mexico changed to require a lottery. It was not something that was specific to Turquoise Trail Charter School. It impacted all state charters.
Right. But previous to that, kids within the zone, they all went to, hey man, if I was growing up off 14, I knew I was going to Turquoise Trail regardless, because there wasn't the lottery.
President Price, Board Member Carrillo, that is correct. And when that happened, it was another attempt on my part to reach out to the board and the superintendent to discuss what we might be able to do to alleviate that and to, again, collaborate to figure out how we could address this issue. Again, I attempted to meet with board members to see if they would be interested in me taking the lead, researching some sort of solution. I received no response.
Okay. I'm good for now. Thank you for your candor.
Board Member Price, Member Creo, thank you.
Any other? Secretary Noble?
Thank you, President Price. So is there any, it's a straight lottery, there is no preference available for students who live in the attendance boundary or nearby?
Board Member Price, Member Noble, that is correct. And incidentally, though I'm hesitant to speak in open forum about some of my thoughts on this issue, that is something that I actually did approach a previous board member and superintendent with in terms of a draft idea, if you will, of a potential solution, something that might allow for a preferential lottery for certain radius within a school, something like that.
Madam President, on that point, I'd like to ask Mr. Zamora, our counsel, but I don't think that the charter law allows a differentiated lottery for charters.
At this point in time.
Don't go away, Mr. Trio.
Madam President, Superintendent Garcia, that's something I would have to...
Excuse me a second. Would you announce who you are and what you do?
Hi. My name is Gino Zamora. It's nice to be back at Santa Fe Public Schools and with the Board of Education. I am from Ortiz and Zamora Law Firm, and we are the board's counsel for the district. That said, off the top of my head, I do not know the answer regarding lottery specifically, but that's certainly something I can look at and provide an answer to the board. But I don't have that off the top of my head tonight.
Thank you.
President Price, Superintendent Garcia, again, I was not saying that that is in place. My intention when I reached out to the district and to the board was that we might research whether or not that was possible, and if not, if we might not be able to collaborate on a solution for that, something that we might be able to figure out a way to implement that.
Okay. Yes, thank you. That's interesting, certainly, and I would imagine as a state charter, I'm not sure what jurisdiction the board has over your attendance policies, but we can look at that in the future. Are you currently fully enrolled?
Board Member Price, or I'm sorry, President Price, Member Noble, yes, we are.
And can you say a little bit about any future expansion plans you have?
President Price, Member Noble, we have looked into possible expansion. It's something that the current Governance Council at Turquoise Trail is very interested in, and something that we have discussed pursuing.
Okay. And I just wonder, given your long experience with Turquoise Trail and with this charter school, if you might say a few words about how you see the role of a charter school in comparison to that of a district school.
President Price, Board Member Noble, in my opinion, and again, having been at this so long, I believe that the relationship should be a collaborative one and one in which the two organizations complement each other. There are some flexibilities, it's true, that charter schools have, and in my opinion, it is something that, again, could be leveraged in order to pilot programs at the charter school that, if successful, would be able to be replicated out into the district. Again, there is some flexibility with attendance. I believe that rather than an attempt to punish a charter school, it could be something, it could be a tool that we could use. Again, you know, we do have that flexibility. So again, I very, very firmly believe that the relationship there should be a collaborative one, a complementary one, something that, again, there are certainly benefits to a district school, some benefits to a charter school, and I firmly believe that it should be a complementary relationship.
And I'm just wondering about any of the specifics there that you see might be an advantage to a charter school, or ideas for pilots, just to give me something to get my brain around.
President Price, Board Member Noble, I apologize. I don't have any of that right off the top of my head. I'm sorry. You know, I can't think of any specific programs that we might implement. But again, the idea being that if there was an innovative pilot type program that was not yet proven, that we wanted to essentially prove on a smaller scale in a smaller school without risking and the expenditures of doing something across the district, we could pilot that, and if successful, we would then be in a position again to roll it out to the rest of the district. If not successful, I believe that it'd be a case where we would have potentially saved quite a bit of money by proving that it wasn't successful.
Thank you. I do want to say, you clearly have some very passionate families, and I think it is everybody's will to work together and to really do things smoothly so that the disruption of lives of families and children is minimized. And clearly, there are people that are passionate about Turquoise Trail Charter Schools, and I have heard things that are all over the map from folks who drive past there and work at home and have to attend other schools, to people who are just so devoted to what you've developed and feel that it's a very special place. So I think, you deserve credit for the environment you've created there and the community that feels at home there.
President Price, Member Noble, thank you very much. That's very much appreciated.
Board Member Creel?
Well, I am going to ask some questions. but we'll see.
If she had put her hand up, I would have seen it. She sits right next to me.
I guess this follows on what Ms. Noble was saying relative to, well, kind of in your presentation, the similarities to Santa Fe Public Schools in the district, our goals, what we do, the pedagogy, things like that. And so often when a charter opens or we open a magnet, it's because they want a specifically differentiated type of curriculum or pedagogy. And we don't see that. What's interesting is we don't see that at Turquoise Trail. We see that people that when it became a charter, they wanted the autonomy of the charter. And who doesn't want autonomy? Especially teachers when, they've got to deal with so much. But, I would imagine, when we look at, or when I look at Turquoise Trail, I basically see a school that if it wasn't a charter, it would just be another one of our public schools in terms of what's being taught there, the way it's being taught, how kids are moving on from grade to grade. We may not have, in some of our schools, the different committees or different things you may have being a charter. But so, because that's also what I remember when the legal thing happened, where you became a lottery school. And I know that Mr. Zamora is going to look into it, but I know that we've looked into it almost ad nauseum. And even if we wanted to, the state forbids us the state forbids you from having a boundary, giving his own preference. And so, I can say that I know that for a certainty, given all the counsel that we've had over my 7 years on the board. And then people aren't just allowed to make exceptions willy-nilly, at charters. And I know the intent could be there to really want to collaborate and accept more kids from the zone. But if it's a lottery school, it's a lottery school.
President Price, Board Member Creel, to your last point, again, I agree with you that under the current charter law, that's not something that can be changed willy-nilly. If I expressed that, I expressed it badly. My intention was that we may collaborate to come up with a larger solution. I had no intention of saying that either our board nor your board could simply make those changes. I do not, I refuse to simply say, well, that's the law, and so, I guess we're just stuck. My intention is to collaborate to see what we can do over and above that, if possible.
Would you? So I guess the challenge I'm having is, absolutely, I want to collaborate. I want to make sure Turquoise Trail stays open. I want to make sure your families stay together regardless of what facility they're in. And I recognize the excellence of the school. Okay? It's on the record, and I've said that.
President Price, Member, thank you.
No, and I do, and I think probably we all do. But we have to get to this issue of the lease. We have to, in order to be able to move forward and collaborate, we first have to accept this is what's real. This is what's factual. And then once we accept that, then we can go to this other place. But until, and I'm hoping, whether it happens tonight or later, that without going to court, because that would be a colossal waste of money, and anytime any of us use legal funds, it's money right out of the classroom, okay? So it's a lease. And I feel like these are facts. These are things that have been tried and true in the courts over the years. And I mean, I believe based on what we've been told by counsel and what I know just from being able to read and write, this is a lease. It ends. We're taking the property back. Now, once we can accept that, and I can only speak for myself here, once we can accept that, then we can say, okay, now let's collaborate. Now let's find what we can do. If we have a property before 2021, maybe that becomes a possibility. But until we accept the facts that are in front of us, we're setting ourselves up for further conflict, which I think it definitely is not in the best interest of kids, because they're never going to get the whole truth. They're only going to get emotion, basically, from parents, community, teachers. So what are your thoughts on this idea of, okay, this is a lease, we're going to have to move out at the end of June 30, 2021, but we can collaborate and partner before then?
Board President Price, Member Creo, again, I believe I've stated as much as I can regarding to the in regards to the lease. Again, what I've said is that the intention of the lease was never related to the charter school staying on the property or not. The lease, the intention of the lease was to determine the reimbursement of PSFA monies, which became available as a legislative change in 2009.
Okay, and at some point tonight, I'd like to hear from council regarding that. And that's all for now, but I really feel very, very strongly that until we get past this place, we're just headed down this abyss.
I just wanted to say, I've been on the school board for 5 years, and I keep hearing you say that you feel we don't listen to you and you feel that we're hostile to you. In the 5 years that I have been on this school board, correct me if I'm wrong, we have never granted a presentation to anyone outside of our district or that had to deal with legal issues or things like that. We have never done what we have done with you tonight. So I wish you would pull back some of your hostility and realize that we have granted you an exception.
Board President Price, I apologize if I misspoke there. Again, when I was referencing that, I was referencing previous boards that I had reached out to and not received responses from. I very, very much appreciate, as I said at the beginning of my presentation, I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I am very appreciative of that. I also want to say that I am absolutely not hostile to the district. I am a strong supporter of the district. I attended every level of Santa Fe Public Schools in this city. I feel very strongly about the district. I have students in the district. I am absolutely not hostile to the district. So I apologize if I presented that way. That's absolutely not my intention. And again, I'm very appreciative of you allowing me time on the agenda.
Thank you. And also you need to know our structure. You know, we run things through our superintendent. We don't as a board have the authority to make decisions on our own about things that, you know, about certain policies. And so that's one of the reasons when I called you, I said to you, please call the superintendent and let's see if we can make arrangements to meet. And then was decided that we would do it this way. And listen to what you have to say. And I hope you realize that we've heard you.
President Price, thank you. And again, I am I'm happy to work with Dr. Garcia, if that's the direction that is given.
Dr. Garcia?
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. I hope that we can clarify that I have met with you in the past, and I have been receptive to meeting with you and your head administrator, Mr. Ray Griffin. It sounded like somehow I'd been contacted and not been responsive. So I hope we can just clarify the record that I have been.
Board President Price, Superintendent Garcia, we have, in fact, we have had at least 3 meetings with myself, you, and our head administrator.
And I do believe that when speaking to Mr. Griffin, and perhaps I spoke out of turn, so I apologize, Mr. Carrillo, I didn't know your concern about having people be here, is that we did talk about, can we work together? You know, I felt like it might be not productive to have, you know, large crowds, and I mean, that's really up to them who they would bring, but that we wanted to work through these issues, because sometimes things can get very emotional, get very escalated, and then people really don't hear each other. And can we work through some of this? And so, you know, I do believe that, you know, sometimes you do get to an impasse. That it happens. When human beings try to resolve conflict, sometimes that happens. But I'm also confident that we do share a mutual concern. This board does, as does the administration, about working collaboratively on behalf of the students that we serve and the families that we serve in the Santa Fe Public Schools District, be they charter or be they in our schools. And so we do care about the families. I know the board cares about the families. And that was, I believe, the intent in giving the notice. Again, that is debatable, but the notice for the 2021 expiration, so that there could be time for this dialogue and for planning, so that families don't hear about this 6 months before or a year before, and puts the charter in a difficult position. So they have plenty of time to respond and us to try to work towards resolution. This came kind of together at the same time that we're experiencing this tremendous overcrowding on the south side, and that we have about 150 students and more that are in what was the old Turquoise Trail boundary that are not able to go to school there because of the lottery. And so those families have also asked, you know, for advocacy, because they also are being displaced. We currently have children at Amy Beale who live in their own neighborhood, maybe even across from their own school, that are being transported to Piñon. So it's this domino effect. So I don't think it comes from any ill intent. It does not come from any negative feeling about the quality of the programming at Turquoise Trail, but rather you have needs, we have needs, and can we work this out in the best interest of all? And so, you know, from the administrative perspective, we are committed to working with Mr. Griffin or whoever, or yourself or whomever you designate, to work with Ms. Wagner and the team, and to include you in part of the study, and as we look at boundaries, as we look at facility usage, as we look at need, to see how we can arrive at a common solution. I mean, that's the goal. And so I hope that we can work together in that way.
President Price, Superintendent Garcia, thank you very much. That is our goal as well.
Vice President Cashman?
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Trujillo. I would be the school board member that represents Turquoise Trail if you were just a regular school. That is within the district that I represent. Throughout your presentation, and I know you've talked about the board's not willingness to work with you, our board has changed over time, so I would like you to say, okay, this is a new day. I would have to say I share some of Mr. Carrillo, board member Carrillo's concerns about when you left being a local charter and went to being a state charter. If you tried to verbalize those, why you didn't want to stay with Santa Fe Public Schools, I don't remember those reasons. I would like you to work with the superintendent to let us know why your board felt that you could no longer stay as a local charter with Santa Fe Public Schools. I think that is an issue that it's a very different composition of the board, and that's an issue, and you don't have to do it publicly, but I would ask you to reach out to our superintendent and talk with her about that, because I think that's an important factor. I also know before I sat on the board, I was a member of the Citizen Review committee. And I do know that we put $12 million to upgrade that facility there. At that time, you were a local charter, and it's a beautiful facility. I've been there for Girl Scout meetings and even did a forum when I was running for school board out at Turquoise Trail. So, and I know that community. But with that said, you know, also because I represent that district, I also have constituents that are Amy Beal, and, you know, the superintendent is right. We have some kids that are now within mainly walking distance and aren't being able to go to their school anymore. So for us, that property, it's a beautiful property, and I could understand why you don't want to leave that property. It's beautiful. I'm very proud of what the renovations that we worked with your team, Dr. Griffin out there, to make that happen. It's a beautiful school, but now we're you know, we know that we have kids. Even I was just talking with a friend the other day that lives in Rancho San Marcos, so within biking distance, and they said, we don't go to Turquoise Trail, we get bused into Amy Beal. So we want to do what's best for our taxpayers, our students, our families. But I think with the lease, when the board decided, and I was then a board member, when we decided on the lease, we decided not to have because we do have some leases, like with Lafarge Library, that is much longer in duration than the lease that we gave you, because we knew that at a time, we can see what's happening out there on the south side, and where would the kids that stay with the public schools go. And so I think there was some long-term vision of the board saying we might need that property back one day for the kids that we are required by law to serve within our Santa Fe public schools. So with that said, you know, I know, as Board Member Carrillo said, we don't, and I know parents feel too, if you love a school, you're going to go wherever the school is, you know, within reason. And so people are passionate about their schools, and we're not saying that we're, first of all, it would be wrong of us to say, because we don't have the legal authority, that we're trying to do away with Turquoise Trail Charter School. You are a state charter. You were the 2014 Charter School of the Year in New Mexico, so you've got a good reputation. But I have to think about the kids that we put on the buses every day and go by Turquoise Trail because they didn't get a lottery into it. And, you know, some of our kids are on buses for a long time. And so, and that's not their choice. That isn't their choice. Kids that go to Turquoise Trail, that is a choice. But my kids that come from Madrid, if they have to drive by Turquoise Trail, that's not a choice for them. It's, you know, and I know those parents sometimes say to me, why can't I go? Or the parents in Rancho San Marcos, which Turquoise Trail just sits on the edge of it, say, I can't put my kid there. They didn't get into the lottery. And so those are also concerns as a board that we have to look at. We want to work with you, but I think right now we've got a different board. So whatever happened in the past, because, you know, I think some of the board members, and I would have to say, I wasn't happy when you went and became a state charter. It was like, oh my gosh, where did this come from? If I missed an email or an invitation, I apologize for that, but that's happened in the past. We need to figure out what we're going to do moving forward, and we know that right now that property is very important to us to relieve some of the overcrowding on the south side. And, you know, since I live on that side of town, I'm clearly aware of what the future development is and what all the different permits go and the yellow public notices. And now that the economy is picking up again, some of those developers that pulled their developments off the table that are along Route 14 are going to probably be putting them back on the table to say, you know, let's build, and then I don't know where those kids are going. So from a board member, I need to look at that and say, you know, where are those kids going that I'm responsible for?
Board President Price, Member Cashman, I apologize if I don't catch all of the, if I don't respond to all of the points, I'll try. First of all, I absolutely do realize that that this is a different board than a newer board, if you will. And again, that is absolutely one of the reasons that I asked to present to this board. Again, in the spirit of attempting to collaborate, of attempting to work with it, and as I said before, I very much appreciate it. I do hope that we can start fresh, if you will, and you know, begin, let the past go. That is my intention, and that is exactly what I'm hoping for. That is exactly what exactly the reason I asked to present. I again very much agree with you, and am very cognizant of the fact that it is difficult for students in Madrid and Cerrillos in those areas that are not able to attend. However, I firmly believe that we can come up with a solution which will be much more beneficial.
Board Member Carrillo?
I'd have to say this, the only solution I can see that would include all of our kids from that zone, and I'm not suggesting this is a solution, would be for you to no longer be any charter and to be either a magnet or school of Santa Fe Public Schools. Legally, as I understand it, and we've been working on this stuff now, I've been working on it now for 7 years, is that's where the law is. It's not as though the legislature is going to take up this issue in fall or in the next session to allow charters to now add boundaries or specifications to their lotteries. I simply don't see that happening. But that's commenting on what Maureen said. And I know that's not what you all want. I mean, you're a charter, you want your autonomy, and you want to do what you want to do. And we want you to, because we recognize it works, okay? But I have to come back to, well, two things. One, in relation to what Ms. Cashman said, you know, there have been a number of editorials, letters to the editor written by parents from Turquoise Trail, even suggesting we need to keep our school here. If you need to build a school, build another school. To which I say, híjole, what are you, nuts? It's like, imagine being a taxpayer and I'm wanting to build another house when I have a perfectly good house that I own right here. The taxpayers would never, ever, ever approve a bond to build probably an elementary out there would be anywhere from like 14 to 18 million. They'd never approve a bond that had that in it when we own a school there. And so there's that first point. And you can jot that down if you want to comment on that, because the second point is, well, the second point is, sooner or later, preferably sooner, we're going to have to resolve the issue of the lease. Okay? So this is a lease. This is why our council's here. It's in black and white, and it's not in fancy small print language. It's the same kind of a lease that I signed when I'm in my condominium. And now my lease is up. So I would just encourage the Turquoise Trail community and the governing board and principal to, at some point, accept that, so then we can move on without additional expense to either of, you know, our entities, because that would just come out of the classroom. I mean, do you see that happening?
Board President Price, Member Carrillo, do I see what happening?
Your acceptance that the lease actually does terminate June 30, 2021.
Board President Price, Member Carrillo, again, my statement stays the previous statement, which, again, that lease The intention of that lease was not to make that determination. It was the intention of that lease, and the purpose of that lease was for something else.
In the lease, and in New Mexico laws, it's been stated to us, you can't add something like intent to a lease where it's not specified in writing in the lease. There's nothing in the lease that speaks to that intent. The only thing in the lease, and I would like to hear from Gino after this, the only thing in that lease is you are going to occupy this site for this period of years for this amount of money. And then you have the opportunity the last time for renewal, and we renewed. And, I mean, we can't say that your intent was to have a, intent that's not written into the lease is not in the lease. It just remains your intent.
Board President Price, Member Creo, again, I am not an attorney, nor am I attempting to address the
Do you
legal
play one on
issues of
TV?
this. I do not. Not even that,
Okay.
Member Creo. So again, I agree with you that it's an issue that needs to be settled. I do not agree that it's an issue that needs to be settled in this forum or at this particular moment. But I do agree that it is something we need to work on. I would like to speak, if I could, to your first point regarding taxpayer dollars at the school. I can only point out that the Turquoise Trail School facility is a taxpayer-owned, taxpayer-funded facility with the intention of serving Santa Fe Public School students. That is what it is doing. That is what it has been doing for over 20 years. It is serving taxpayer students, over almost 500 of them.
And doing so very well.
I would like to say that in a matter of full disclosure, I had 2 grandchildren who went to Turquoise Trail. However, you need to know that both of them lived on North Fork, and because they didn't win the lottery, one was bused all the way to Laragoite, and the other one was bused to Nava. And then one got into Turquoise Trail, and the other one didn't win the lottery, and so he didn't get in until the following year. So, and I know the hardship that the family went through, being grandmother and having to go pick up sick kids at two different schools. That were, just think about that. Think about a kid on a bus who lives on North Fork, who rides right by Turquoise Trail, and got sent to one sent to Nava and one to Laragoite. You know where Laragoite is?
Board President Price, yes, I do. And again, I believe I've said several times, I am committed to finding a solution to this.
Well, this is years. This has been going on for years. Let me move on because we seem to be going in a rather spiral, if not circular, argument here. I would like to hear from our attorney about the lease. That means you, Mr. Zamora. I think he's very handsome in that jacket. I mean, in that coat.
Board President Price, board member, superintendent. Before there's a specific question on the table, I would like to give a little bit of a history to provide some clarification. And that is this: in late 2014, early 2015, under a previous superintendent and under a previous board, Mr. Trujillo raised some large issues in the relationship between the district, while they were a district charter at that time, and at that time by the previous superintendent. I happened to be the designee to collaborate with Mr. Trujillo. I think we developed a really good working relationship. So I collaborated with him and their council, and we spent the next 7 months meeting multiple times a month or corresponding multiple times a month. And the result of that collaboration, as directed by the board and approved by the board, was renegotiated terms of the lease with Turquoise Trail. And we're talking about the original lease from, I believe, 2008. And so we did collaborate. We did collaborate under the last superintendent and under the last board. And we reached a solid agreement approved by the governing council of Turquoise Trail, approved by Santa Fe Public Schools Board, in which there were clarifications made to the lease that satisfied and solved a lot, if not all, of the issues raised by Mr. Trujillo and his council. So I think the history of collaboration has extended for a while now, and been quite productive. Now, during those negotiations, with all of the issues that were solved, what did not change and what remained as part of the terms of the lease was the expiration date in 2021. Now, that is not the first expiration date in that lease. I believe the first expiration date in that lease was 2014. But the lease was quite generously drawn for Turquoise Trail that said Turquoise Trail had the option of renewing the lease. And they exercised that option to extend it from 2014 to 2021. Now, to address a couple of points, and interrupt me if you want to ask questions, but to address a couple of points, throughout the charter statutes in the New Mexico School Code, the constant reference is the lease between the district and the charter school, and the terms of the leases, and the need for the lease, because it is those lease payments that the charter school then turns around and seeks reimbursement through NMPED. So without a written lease, you lack several things. And I've never researched the issue of whether or not it's required. It tends to be a non-issue because a lease exists that was now twice approved by Turquoise Trail's governing council and approved with an expiration date of 2021. So it's a non-issue because there's a lease in place. But number two, let's flip it on its head and say that a lease is not required, and therefore there should be no lease. Or let's assume for a moment that there was no lease. The difficulty is there's no longer a guarantee for Turquoise Trail to be there to 2021. There then becomes a question of who maintains the structure. Who's liable if there's an injury there? Who replaces HVAC systems? All of that has been addressed in this lease that has run from 2008 through 2021. So I couldn't imagine a circumstance, even though apparently prior to 2008 there wasn't a lease for years, why two governmental entities would not have a lease to define payment, term, and responsibilities. And I think both the governing body, or the Board of Education, and the governing council of Turquoise Trail did a very intelligent thing by reducing all of this to a lease in 2008. And the terms of the lease have always had an expiration date of 2021. Now, beyond that, I want to hit one other point, because this isn't a unique question. In 2015, I was in-house counsel when I was the designee to work with Mr. Trujillo and his counsel. I've since gone into private practice, and our law firm represents 27 school districts within this state. The relationship described by Mr. Trujillo between Turquoise Trail and Santa Fe Public Schools when it was a district charter is the same relationship that I've heard with 27 other school districts in the state in their charter schools. And it was an observation by the mediator that we agreed to use when we were finalizing the lease. We needed to work through things. We needed a third party to help us get past the finish line. We got pretty close, but we didn't get all the way there. And the mediator that we agreed to retain to finish the negotiations of the lease and reach a lease agreement that we signed and approved on both sides, that mediator said, the problem's not the charter, and the problem's not the district. Unfortunately, the problem, and I'm saying this is his observation, is that the statutes pit charters and districts against each other for the same kids, for the same resources, all of these things. So as personal as it is with the relationship between Turquoise Trail and the district, these are the same stresses that every other district experiences with their charter also. So I just wanted to provide, one more point. The last point is that this question is not unique, and it has been decided by the First Judicial District Courts. And the question I'm talking about is the question of whether the district is obligated to lease this exact property to Turquoise Trail indefinitely, beyond 2021. This was a question raised in the First Judicial District Court between the charter school and Espanola School District, in which District Judge Sarah Singleton ruled the following. The court finds that the lease term cited in a lease agreement has meaning and provides for a period of occupation which shall end when the term of the lease ends. A lease has a termination date by law and by contract. That's a reminder. A lease is a contract. Turquoise Trail has a contract with the district. The district has a contract with Turquoise Trail. Judge Singleton continued on by saying the court further finds that there was no intent by the legislature to give a charter school a life estate in any building. The legislature used the word lease because parties to the lease would negotiate and come to an agreement which would include the terms of the use of the facility. As a side note, the court further found that to the extent there's been a suggestion that the charter school gets to pick any facility that it wants, the court disagrees that this is a viable interpretation of the relevant statutes read together. So, we do have a judge that's considered exactly this issue in this judicial district who has made that ruling on the same question when another school district said your lease ends and we need the facility back.
Board Member Carrillo?
Can anything be assumed to be in a lease or a contract that is not directly stated and written in said contract?
I think he means intentions.
Right.
Anything.
So with a contract, and in here a lease, what is the agreement between the parties is what is negotiated and put in the lease and in writing to be included in that lease.
I'll take that as a no. Okay, thank you. And then my recollection when I came on the board, you probably remember, I want to say Shelley or Sherry or Sally, the former principal. Oh, you would remember, of course. The former principal of Turquoise Trail going back 2008, 2009.
Sandy.
Sandy. So, really enjoyed Sandy.
Yes.
And so.
Before that, it was Harriet Foreman.
So I'm sorry?
And before that, it was Harriet Foreman.
I didn't know Harriet, but Sandy I knew and really enjoyed her a lot. So my understanding of that time period and why Turquoise Trail was granted to be a local charter, even though nothing changed. The kids in the area went to the school. Nothing changed. They just became a local charter, was because of a very special friendship and respect that the former superintendent, Ms. Gutierrez, and Sandy had for one another. Because there wasn't a different pedagogy. There wasn't a different way of doing nothing. It was just they wanted this autonomy. Sandy wanted to do things. That's my recollection.
Actually, it was a conversion school. It was one of the 5 conversions. They're no
Is that it?
longer allowed in statute.
Okay.
And at that time, it was right before I came to Santa Fe Public Schools.
Yes.
And I actually wound up supervising 4 of the 5, because I roamed the earth with the dinosaurs, 4 of the 5 conversion charters, and Turquoise Trail was one. The rest were in Albuquerque.
Okay.
And so that was the genesis of that basically, they used to call them school restructuring councils, which later became SAP.
It's also why it was granted. There wasn't a conflict around it. It was
No,
very
it's-
amicable.
It was in statute. It was allowed for, if you had a petition, so many parents, you wrote up a charter, you could become a conversion
But the board could have
school.
said no.
And there was only, yes, and the only chartering authority at that time was the district. The PEC did not do that.
Right.
The
That makes sense,
the
but it was that
PEC didn't
relationship.
even
There was
exist.
no conflict around it. My understanding is the board said, yes, we,
Well,
okay.
yeah.
I
But
want to
it
thank
was-
Mr. Trujillo, and thank you, Mr. Zamora Esquire.
I'm not done. Thank you. Do you have questions?
Thank you.
President Price, board members, thank you. I very much appreciate the
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, board members.
Can we let this go right now?
No, I have more.
Really?
Yeah, really.
Go on.
So my hope is that after tonight and probably within the next 6 months, because I can't stress it enough, that we're able to put the legal piece to bed. Because that is I believe that, and whether or not anyone else speaks up to this effect, that is the only thing that is going to allow us to move forward, because that is the obstacle. And once that obstacle is removed, the whole world opens up in terms of possibility. So I would ask anybody in the community that's watching, if they want to look at the relevant statute that Ms. Singleton decided on in 2015 or 16, it was Velarde, wasn't it? That in Velarde and Espanola, or?
It was Espanola and
Right. Okay. They can look it up. We're not making all this stuff up about statute and leases and things like that. So, I mean, it's really important that this move to a different place, and I really believe that that's the only thing that's going to allow it to do so.
Well, the beliefs of one person and the intentions of another are not the same necessarily. I'd like us to move on, please, to the legislative update. Mr. Gummer?
Board President Price, members of the board, Superintendent Garcia. This presentation is a legislative update since the session has ended, and will cover a number of things that our legislative lobbyist, Ms. Linda Siegel, and I will cover together. The discussion topics are these. We'll go through an overview, which Ms. Siegel will address. I'll touch on the overview of HB 2. Ms. Siegel will go through the bills that passed and the bills that didn't pass, the key ones that we've been talking about. I'll reflect on the impacts for Santa Fe Public Schools as our initial understanding of what this means, and then we have a slide which goes over special capital outlay as well. So we'll move on. To the overview. Siegel.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Garcia. So this was a very collegial legislative session, which is kind of a new thing over the last 8 years. And the main reason was because we had money. That really helps to make people want to work together more. And of course, a large portion of that money is from our increase recently in the price of a barrel of oil and natural gas. As you may remember me saying in the past, some of you, that for every $1 that a barrel of oil increases or decreases, the state either gets $10 million new dollars or loses $10 million. And we've got oil at about $65 a barrel right now. So the state has definitely increased. So we had about $287 million new dollars to work with. And the priorities of the House Appropriations Committee, the LFC prior to that, and the Senate Finance was public education. That was the #1 priority. And then for the money, employee raises, because as you all know, the schools haven't had a raise, the state hasn't had a raise, the colleges and universities haven't had raises, salary increases for their employees. And then one of the third priorities for many in the legislature, because of the high level of crime in Albuquerque and other cities, as it turned out in much testimony, lots of other cities in our state have a higher crime rate than Albuquerque. Of course, Albuquerque's the biggest. So criminal justice issues were hot on it. So the tone and the climate was very much more positive. And as you can see, we increased the budget by about 3.9%, with new funding of about $240 million, although some of that money, about $70 million or so, was used to replace the one-time only money that we're functioning on in this fiscal year. But all in all, it led to some very nice increases for several areas, especially public education. And we have our state reserves at almost 10%, about $627 million. So, do we have, okay.
I'll go ahead and touch on this slide. So what this means for public school support and related appropriations were increases at all levels. So above the line, middle line, below the line, all increased. See, the below the line was the biggest increase, but overall it was just under 2% increase in the allocations to public school support. And the most critical pieces of this...
Excuse me 1 second. Board Member Garcia.
Thank you. Carl, can you explain to me what above the line, middle line, below the line?
Sure. President Price, Member Garcia, above the line is the state equalization guarantee. That's how we look at it. So the resources that are put there are put into a fund that we have the authorization to use however it best suits the priorities of the Board of Education. So it's got a lot of flexibility. Middle line, this is something new. It's being referred to as middle line. This is the funds of transportation and instructional material, which we've often referred to and continue to refer to as categorical funds, meaning the funds that are allocated for transportation can only be used for transportation, for instructional materials, only for instructional materials. Below the line is the programs that the public education department support for initiatives which they feel are going to move public education forward in the state. And for us, a couple of the key funds that we find there are K3+ and pre-K, which are very important to our district. And there's a number of other programs which support principal education, teacher education, and on, which find their way to different districts in a very unequalized way.
So just to be clear, so I'm just going to be more direct, you have to apply for those funds? They are not just granted to you via formula like they do in the state equalization guarantee in the midline and above the line. And so we consider them disequalizing. They were originally intended to be to pilot programs, not to be mainstay programs year after year after year after year. And there have been times in the legislature has questioned that it seems to have become politicized as to which districts sometimes get those funds.
President Price, moving on to the compensation line item, which is, the superintendent has said many times and the board has validated that the compensation is our #1 priority in the district. These different elements here certainly make a difference in our ability to do something with compensation this year. So one of the bills raises the three-tier minimums by $2,000 each. From 34 to 36, from 42 to 44 for Tier 2, and 52 to 54 for Tier 3. So there's $17.6 million in a pool that's been allocated and approved to support that initiative. Then on top of that, there's a 2.5% increase for all licensed teachers. and there's a $31.27 million pool that supports that initiative. There's also a $14.14 million pool to support an average of 2.0% increase for all other instructional staff and other licensed and unlicensed staff. So that's everybody else. And then since transportation has employees and it's a categorical fund, there's a small amount which was approved in the transportation budget to be able to support a similar 2% increase for all transportation employees.
Which equals $64.14 million. And what happens if next year oil drops by, within the next year, $3 a barrel? Is there any part of this that's held harmless for us because all of those are contractual for us with our employees and recurring expenses? Do we have any protection from a downturn relative to these new expenses?
President Price, Member Carrillo, the superintendent may be able to better talk to this since she was the secretary for the Board of Education for a long period of time. My short answer would be it's an obligation of the legislature.
Madam President, board members, Secretary Garcia, what would probably happen if there is a Secretary Garcia, yes, I promoted you again, they would probably take it out of the SEG, which, I mean, there is no guarantee ever about how much money is in any line item in state government. So anything can be cut at any time.
So is it safe to say that until we have some sort of legislation holding education harmless from downturns in budget and cuts, that we're always going to live on the edge, if you will?
That's probably correct. And Madam President, Board, I don't see any legislation like that ever happening because every year is a new year. It's the legislature's obligation every year to address whatever funds they have and divide them as best they can.
I would go further to say that they don't make education a priority in the state of New Mexico. So when there are cuts, it's like they just as soon take the food off the kid's plate rather than look anyplace else, like economic development or whatever. But that's just, you know, me Steve-ifying.
Vice President Cashman.
So this is great that we have pay raises. I wish there were a lot more. But should we be, when we're going out to our employees, letting them know this is a one-time pay raise, that we're not guaranteeing that it's going to be continuous, or are we obligated to make it continuous, and it just means we have less money, even though teachers are in the classroom, but less money for other classroom items?
Well, it's recurring. It's contractual.
It's in the base. I mean, once it's in the SEG, it's in the base. And so you start from that. Now, of course, like last year, we had that odd situation where, you know, we had the cash balances swept and we had a lot of other things going. But usually, once it's in the base, it's in the base, your base funding. However, with that said, that doesn't mean that you have other areas that are cut or underfunded, like insurance or whatnot, and then you have to make up those differences.
Board Member Carrillo?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
So this is good news as well. Other SCG funding increases, insurance and fixed costs, $2.79 million. The at-risk index, which was a part of a bill that was approved, changing the T&E index to a teacher index, which we'll talk about here in a moment, and increasing the at-risk index from where it is now, 0.106, to 0.130 in this year, this budget year, and it'll increase to 0.14 and 0.15 in 2 subsequent years. All positive and been discussed for a long time. Categorical fund increases, the transportation increase is certainly positive and gets us much closer to removing our subsidy. Instructional materials, which was cut 50% last year, we're moving close back to, where we were the 2 years ago for instructional materials. And most notably, largely because of the return on investment studies that the Legislative Finance Committee and Legislative Education Study Committee have been conducting, showing the highest return on investment for education funding is in these programs, K3+ and pre-K. So they lobbied for increases in funding, which are significant for next year.
Board Member Carrillo?
Hand up for me.
I called it.
Oh, okay, that's cool. The $2.79 million for insurance and fixed costs, will the increase, will that cover the actual expense for employees of the increase for their insurance?
President Price, Member Carrillo, Superintendent, that remains to be seen.
Okay.
And the reason why it remains to be seen is that we've done such tremendous work on the operations side that perhaps our utility expense won't go up next year. Our risk insurance did not go up this year from the previous year. So then it remains on the health insurance premium largely as to what happens with the amount that we'll need to cover in order to be whole. There isn't much money that comes from our portion of this increase.
So we could still end up in the budget that we're working on now having to subsidize health insurance for our employees. And we're committed to that. We've always done that. So that could still be the case. Okay. On the transportation and instructional material side, so does this mean, especially on the transportation side, that we're no longer going to have to subsidize it from our operational? That it'll be whole once again? Because for a while it was great.
President Price, Superintendent, Member Carrillo, it'll be close. And we have a chart coming up here towards the end of the presentation, which is close aboard, which shows the amounts that we would project from this pool based on our percentage of total program units in the state. And to specifically answer your question, what that means is a couple $100,000 more, all of the things being equal in the transportation formula, which gets us close.
Mr. Grandler, would you just clarify on the categorical fund increase, if I may, Madam President?
Vice President?
I just want to just clarify that number, though. Is it 8.57% or is it really 85.7%?
85.7. And it's about $6 million more. But they cut it 50% last year.
So much down that this looks like it's a huge increase.
Exactly. Exactly.
Vice President,
so then on, so I heard you say that the biggest return on investment in education generally comes from programs like K3+ and pre-K, right? Is that what I heard you say?
Yes, President Price, Member Carrillo, that's correct, and that's coming from the studies that were conducted by the LFC and the LESC.
So not just the LFC and the LESC, but basically studies that have been done all over the country and the world, and all of those, when we look to this ridiculously titled, it's not Race to the Top, No Time to Lose. I just, when we look to that, imagine that all those countries that we want to emulate, that's where they put their money. So then, and I guess you're going to come to it later, Linda, where the Senate Finance didn't understand their moral obligation to kids in New Mexico. So I just wanted to, okay, thanks.
Vice President Cashman.
On the instructional materials increase, is that going to cover the next-gen science standards, or that's not going to be, that there's a different pot of below-the-line funding that PED is going to give us to implement those next-gen science standards? Do you know?
President Price, Superintendent Garcia, Vice President Cashman, our understanding is that the instructional materials allocation is what we get. So I'm not aware of another pot of funds, and as the superintendent said, if it was there, we'd have to apply for it anyway with a very unequal distribution. So what we get in instructional materials in the allocation is what we'll have to work with, in addition to what we perhaps will be able to do again in setting aside some funds in the operational budget to support what we know to be necessary instructional materials needs over and above what we receive in the categorical fund.
So we haven't received any guidance from Public Education Department on how they're going to fund Next Gen and all the professional training, or every school district is taking it out of their hide?
Not yet, Madam President, members of the board. We have a spring budget workshop. Is that in, what, a couple of
Early
weeks?
April.
Early April. Wow, that's kind of late, actually. And maybe there will be more guidance there, but as of yet, I'm not aware of anything specific.
Continue, please. Oh, excuse me. Board Member Garcia?
Regarding the below funding increases, the K-3 program, pre-K program, so are those new programs that they're trying to instill, or is that the existing programs that are currently on the books? Do we know?
Madam President, members of the board, I think it includes current programs and additional. So we have, I don't know what the current allocation was, and then for each district, it's going to be different. We had a reduction in K-3 plus and pre-K last year. And the community helped us with K-3 plus, particularly the Santa Fe Community Foundation, and then we had to make some adjustments within the district. So there is expansion. That may not necessarily mean expansion for the Santa Fe Public Schools. Just depends.
Please.
Okay, so, Madam President, Superintendent, board members, these are some of the key, most of, actually, I think all of the key legislation that passed. House Bill 48, the prior year data for school distributions, that's for the Public School Capital Improvements Fund, and instead of taking the last year's average, it will be an average, or the last year's actual, it'll be an average of the last two, the second and third year. So that passed on the governor's desk. The House Bill 98, which we spent a lot of time on over the last several years trying to fight this bill. It was vetoed by the governor last year. It almost made it to the governor the prior year. And unfortunately, it did pass this year after numerous amendments and changes in the waning moments of the session. So what it does now is it combines all of the some of the nonpartisan elections, like the public schools, community college, these where you have water boards and conservancy districts and other taxing districts. It combines them in one election.
Excuse me, we water board in this state?
There are water.
No.
Okay. So it combines them in the odd number of years in November, the first Tuesday in November on the odd years, except it exempts the municipalities. That was the only way this bill could pass, is if all the municipalities were exempt, and they may still hold, many of them hold their elections in March, and they will still have their elections in March, and including Albuquerque, which has its elections in October, and at one point had a special amendment to protect it, but then they lost that amendment in the last in the conference committee report.
So that affects school boards.
So school boards must have their elections in November. Wow. In Santa Fe, along with the community college, which is exactly what we have been doing for the last several years, holding our elections together. But now they must be in November. And municipalities may opt in to the November election, but I seriously doubt that Santa Fe will, and I seriously doubt very many of the municipalities. So we have created this complicated election bill so that school boards and community colleges and some of these other taxing districts will be able to hold their elections in November with the stated purpose of increasing turnout.
Board Member Creel?
Any chance the governor will veto it this time around?
Madam President, Superintendent, school board members, it's possible. I know the School Board Association, the Superintendent Association is working against it. Some of are trying to get the governor to veto it. Some of our community colleges, including mine, will be asking her to veto it, but we have no idea.
So the thinking around this was increasing turnout by combining elections? That's the basic
thought.
premise, right?
Right.
What happens to bonds, school bonds?
Okay, school bonds, I know that in Santa Fe, we have a school bond every year.
And SB 9 and HB 22, all
Right.
that?
HB 33.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
So, in the even number of years, this was also in a last-minute amendment, you all, the Santa Fe Public Schools, may have your election for bonds with the March municipal election. Now, that will be somewhat confusing because you have different voter populations, but that's what you may do. Now, one of the big problems on this bill is the funding mechanism, which requires an annual assessment to the Secretary of State's new fund, election fund, and that annual assessment is based on your general operating fund. So I think you're at about 97 million. And so it's $250 for every 1 million of your general operating fund, which would have to be paid annually to the Secretary of State. Now, when I figured this out for Santa Fe, the public schools would pay about $25,000 in your annual assessment. We at the community college, because we have a much smaller budget, we would only pay $8,000. So it's a very inequitable situation where right now we split the elections 50-50. I don't know what other entities might be in our November election, but that's one of the reasons I oppose this
Board
bill.
Member Garcia?
Wanted to continue.
All right.
Yeah. So on a bond election, does that cover the cost of our bond elections? This money we're putting into the kitty, or now we're going to have additional money in whatever, even or not, whatever, to have our bonds?
Madam President, Superintendent, Board Member Carrillo, that is unknown. It will not cover. I mean, it's unknown what you will have to do. Will there be another assessment, which is actually not enabled in the language? Will the Secretary of State have to absorb that? We don't know, because that will not be enough money to pay for that second election. Or maybe the city of Santa Fe would like to absorb it.
President Price, Superintendent Garcia, Member Carrillo. Yes, it is. Our understanding of this is that we'll be assessed this every year. And that if we have a special election, a special bond election, which we would next year for the ETN, it would be a mail ballot.
Except now you can do it with the municipality. You can
Oh, you
hold
can-
it in March, or you can do a mail ballot.
All right. Either way,
This is
there
bizarre.
would be additional expense. Our fixed expense we're charged per year plus anything we do additional. That's actually a good change.
Board Member Garcia?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. You mentioned.
It's okay. So then does the legislation say we have to have bonds with the municipalities, or we can choose to have them with the municipalities?
Madam President, Superintendent, Board Member Garcia,
Rudy.
you can have it either as a special election where you have to do 100% mail whenever you want it on that even number of years, or you can have it with the city of Santa Fe's municipal election. Either or.
So
Vice
that's
President.
that's just kind of confusing, because if you live out in the county, obviously you can't vote in the municipality limits. So you have to, so therefore you can't vote for that bond if you live in Los Angeles. Let's take it.
You'll have individualized ballots that'll have some people with a bond question on it and other people with the city election on it.
Vice President Cashman?
So hopefully the governor vetoes this, because this is very confusing for everybody and it could cost us a lot of money. However, if she approves it, when would this bill go in? I mean, we have school board elections in February.
Guess what?
So,
All right.
tell us. because-
Madam President, Superintendent, Board Member Cashman, this goes into effect in July of 2018. That means that we share with the community college an election in February of 19 to elect our members. That election would then move until November, and the sitting board members' terms would be extended to November.
You can understand what
Thank you.
Okay.
This also,
All right, I'll move on.
just really quick on that note, actually,
Okay.
and it's
Board
just
Member
for people
Garcia?
know that, thank you. That's a 300-page bill.
Yes,
And so, good luck to the governor.
yeah.
On that point, Madam President, I just want to thank Ms. Siegel. She worked really hard on this, and, so did Carl, but, I really appreciate her alerting us and working with our delegation and making the point that it really was unfair to the Santa Fe Public Schools. We're carrying an unfair portion of the burden on this. And so truly want to thank you for your efforts on it. It wasn't not for trying that this thing got through.
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. All right, the next bill is Senate Bill 119, and that Carl already talked about the increase in the budget, and that is the increase in the statutory minimum salaries. So that took the salaries up another $2,000. So the governor needs to sign this in order for the money to be available through House Bill 2, but I don't see any problem with her doing that. And Senate Bill 157 is that phased-in teacher cost index and the increase in the at-risk money. And that is a bill that has been introduced for a couple of years now to try to address the at-risk and to address the issues that you have with the T&E index. And those problems have been solved with this legislation. Then one that I forgot to add on here is Senate Bill 97, which is the military spouse and expedited teacher license. So if someone from the military comes in who is a teacher and wants to get a teacher license, or their spouse does, there will be a process within PED for expediting that license. Then Senate Bill 239 is the school capital outlay for security, which allows from the PSCOC an additional $5 million, or $5 million a year coming out of that already existing fund for the next 5 years to be spent. I don't exactly know how it would be allocated. I'm assuming you have to apply for it. But that money would be an additional amount for security added.
Board Member Carrillo?
Back to Senate Bill 95, that's what you said, the military spouse teacher?
97?
That one, sure. So expediting the process by which a spouse can get a teacher license.
Or an active military who wants to get a teacher's license.
Expediting how? I mean, I don't like the idea, quite frankly, of fast-tracking someone just for the sake of fast-tracking them, because that's what's wrong with America now. We have a lot of people teaching who never really got the education and experience they needed from a lot of our universities. They're getting EDs, but I want to know what it means. So if that's not what it means, Maureen, if we're fast-tracking, what does that mean?
So, Madam President and board members, it would, it creates the process, and I actually don't know what the process is, but it says the local and superintendent may require a mentorship period for this new licensee if deemed necessary, and teachers holding out-of-state licenses may apply for a lower level license if they're not qualified for the higher. So it is still contingent upon the holder meeting all of the requirements, but I'm not sure how long it takes to get a license, but this would expedite it, and it would be good for only 1 year, and then they'd have to reapply.
Vice President Cashman?
And I could be wrong, my understanding, when they say expedited, if you're a military spouse and you have a teacher's license in Massachusetts, and you come here to New Mexico, to get a New Mexico license, there's no reciprocal.
Reciprocity.
Thank you. And so I think that's what they're saying. They're going to expedite those licenses while you're waiting to get your permanent license. I don't think they're saying just because you're a military spouse, you can teach. It's if you have a teaching license, because I know when I got my teaching license, it took forever.
Board Member Garcia?
I think this bill was passed for Board Member Cashman, so she can go back to teaching and right? Your military family, spouse.
She's the military.
Oh, she's the military.
Okay, let's talk about the bills that, I'm sorry.
Vice President
I did
Cashman?
want to ask, this school capital outlay for security, it's not much, 5 million, but is it going to be only given to if if the Public School Finance Authority
Capital outlay,
it
yeah.
divvies it up, then we probably won't get any from Santa Fe because we have bonding capacity.
Right.
Is that the gist of that bill, that only the really small school districts that rely on the state taking care of their buildings and facilities will get this money? Or is it up for grabs for everybody?
Madam President, Board Member Superintendent, I believe that it follows the normal process. So that would mean that Santa Fe would not have access to that money.
Don't use that word.
Do we know that for sure?
That is what I think I remember reading in the bill. 239, let me just check real quick.
I was just asking if we knew that for certain, because I was hoping that we were going to be included.
It says it requires the PSCOC to develop guidelines for security systems. I'll have to look back at the bill and clarify, but I'm pretty sure it's following the regular PSCOC rules.
Oh, just for those districts that do not have bonding capacity?
Or don't have much bonding capacity, and
Which would exclude us?
right. But I'll verify that and let you know. All right, the bills that didn't pass, one of the interesting ones was a bill introduced to try to get the full 42 million of cash balances back. Of course, that bill did not go anywhere, but in House Bill 2, when it came out of the Senate, it had 10 million in of cash balances to be returned to in an equal manner to the schools if after October or after August, the August revenue consensus update showed that we still had 10% reserves. So you wouldn't be getting that money back until after August. But then the House didn't like that, and they changed it so that it was only 5 million. But then when I was reading through another portion of the conference committee, which was done when the Senate passed House Bill 2, sent it back to the House, House didn't like it, then they had a conference committee, and on the last day they made some agreements. They put in another 10 million, but that would be accessible through the SEG with certain conditions. Again, that 10% cash balance reserves in August. So you might get some money back, but probably not much. Another bill that didn't pass and was hotly debated was the school bus replacement, changing it from 12 years to 15 years. That failed in the Senate. The House Bill 180, which was the Think New Mexico bill, which had...
Excuse me a second.
Is this
School
on that
Board
point?
Member Carrillo?
Curious as to where did it fail in the Senate? Did it get out of committee, or?
I think that it didn't... Let me look.
Which one are you talking about, school bus?
School bus.
I believe that it didn't actually get heard in the Senate, because I remember hearing the debate on the House floor, and they did pass it. So it must have just not, it was very late in the game, so it probably didn't get a Senate committee hearing, because it didn't.
Madam President, that point, that's a really tough one, because it's about safety. And how far do you, I mean, because we've already been stretching that out, because it used to be less than 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
And now to think about 15 years, you know. Well, I mean, this would have extended the time.
It,
so
yeah.
it's good that the Senate didn't hear it, because this would have allowed the replacement to go out to 15, which we don't want.
All right, House Bill 180, that was the bill that created mandatory percentages of how much money is spent in the actual classroom. And that bill languished in the House Education Committee after many attempts to, quote, improve it. And it was, the percentages were decreased in the last version of the bill, but the bill was still tabled. So it didn't even get out of one committee, but it did have a lot of discussion, hours and hours of hearings.
Vice
President,
do you think that's going to come back? Is that going to be, I mean, where is your sensing on where the legislators were? Do you think we're going to be seeing this year in, year out?
Madam President, Superintendent, Board Member Cashman, I think it will be back, absolutely. It's an agenda of Think New Mexico, so I think it'll come back next year in some other version. The House Bill 297 was an interesting school attendance bill with the truancy issue, and we've seen this bill several years before, where you can lose your driver's license if you're a student, if you're truant, but then there were a number of other perhaps positive interventions, and this got a couple of hearings and vigorous discussion, but ultimately was tabled in a House committee. Then Senate Bill 36 was Senator Sol's bill. He's from Las Cruces, saying that we need 300 and I think it was 28 million for actual school districts sufficiency. That bill died pretty quick. School district personnel minimum salary, Senate Bill 157 or 57, that was creating a minimum wage of $16 for other non-instructional employees. That died also. Senate Bill 147 was that school size adjustment, where after it was amended in the first committee, it said if you have a school within 0.5 miles of another school, you're not going to get the small size adjustment money, and that the charters would also not get it. That would have impacted us somewhat, but that bill died too. And then an interesting bill which Senator Stewart introduced to limit enrollment after the age of 21. That one also died pretty quick. The final one is one that, of course, has been worked on for 8 years, I believe, which is the expansion of the permanent fund for early childhood. That bill passed the House by 3 votes. It was going to be close there for a while, and then went over to the Senate and never had a hearing. And in the past, it's usually had 1 hearing in the Senate and then gone to the Senate Finance Committee, and that was the end of it.
Vice President Cashman?
On that last one, on the early childhood, you know, I know there are loads of people that are in favor of the permanent fund, you know, taking it from, but, you know, and I understand Senator Smith's, you know, reservations about it. Maybe what we could, and I don't know whether this would help us, but, you know, we want this early childhood education. The state needs it. Maybe what we could do, and I don't know how much money, and I sent something over to Think New Mexico, is why couldn't we do not tax everything on the internet. would we generate enough tax if we put in that internet tax? It would be fairer to our small businesses, and would it generate enough revenue so we wouldn't have to tap the permanent fund? I don't know, but I sent that over to try to look at a different way of getting money so we can get this, because I don't see it passing Senate Finance with the composition that we have. So maybe this is a way around it. Do internet sales taxes.
I just paid that tonight on Amazon. I know.
Well, I will, Madam President, Superintendent, board members, I will say that there will be major tax reform legislation in the next session. It was held in abeyance this time because the Democrats really didn't want to do major tax reform in the last year of this governor, and they and a 30-day session is really not the place to do such a complicated bill. Last year there was a 250-page tax reform bill introduced, which was impactful to the school districts because you would lose your sales tax exemption. It got rid of all the nonprofit. It got rid of all medical exemptions and health care. It was a pretty draconian bill, which needs a lot more study. So there will be a bill next year, which hopefully will be thought out during the interim in the tax committee. And internet sales will be a piece of that. Whether it will be earmarked or not is a whole other issue, because the legislature doesn't really like earmarks.
Dr. Garcia?
Madam President, members of the board, in my last assignment, tour of duty, there was a lot of analysis done on trying to identify funds and sources.
Bless you.
And even the need will not be met even with that distribution from the Land Grant Permanent Fund. To really fully fund it, you would need that and something else. And so, I think that what it's going to take really is the advocacy from the governor, which is what it took last time. Because getting it passed is, getting it through here is one thing, but then getting the electorate to vote for it is going to be a lot, and that's where you would need the governor behind it. So there's hope, I think, even getting it out of finance, possibly, if you had the governor behind it.
I have a
Board Member Carrillo?
I have a question, and I probably should know the answer to this, but I don't. All the representatives every 2 years there got around again. What about senators? Is it alternate 4 years for some of them, or how does that work?
Madam President, board member, superintendent, it's every year, every other year on the even years is the House of Representatives, and then on the next even year is the Senate. So the Senate is elected all at one time, and the House is elected all at one time every 2 years.
Okay.
So 2020 will be a Senate election as well as another House election.
This is 2018. Okay, so then really, regardless of who's governor, or if something doesn't even get heard because of the hubris of the chair of Senate Finance, where he just knows all the votes in his head, so he won't even let something be heard, that could easily happen again next year and possibly the year following before we get maybe a change on that committee to actually let it go to the voters. Because, we voters, we're not very bright. We couldn't possibly vote on this on our own. That's just Steve and me doing. All right. Because to not even have it be heard was deplorable.
Okay.
Continue, please.
All right. President Price, members of the board, Superintendent Garcia. This slide draws our focus to the impacts of what we just talked about to the budget season we are embarking upon. And you can see the way this is set up is the category of the cost, the fund that's there, then the pool of the increase that we've talked about, that we've shown in different places here, and then our percentage of the total program units in the state. This is how we generate our portion of funding, by and large. As the superintendent said, not necessarily below the line in K3 and pre-K, because that we have to apply for that, but it's a surrogate for the amount we might be able to access. But we can see that on the teacher side, in the operational budget for our teachers that are paid for, which is most of them out of the operational budget, it looks like it's going to be about $1.88 million. And the superintendent has commissioned a collaborative compensation task force, which involves NEA and SFPS membership as well as district membership, and we're tackling this issue because these are average increases. So NEA is very excited, as are we, about looking at salary schedules and having them more sensical and differences between the cells. So with this pool size, the models have already been established, and we're working on that as a part of our work prior to official negotiations. Other staff, you can see approximately $500,000, a little bit more than $500,000. The insurance fixed costs that I think it was Member Carrillo asked about, $110,000. So what we're going to have to see is a fairly flat health insurance premium this year for that to cover what our cost increase could be. The at-risk index certainly will be a positive contribution in our SEG. Transportation, a small amount for the salary increase, and then our estimate of the transportation increase is a couple $100,000, which again will get us close, all other things being equal, which there are many portions of the revenue formula for transportation, so it's hard to say definitively, but it certainly puts us in a better position. Instructional materials, that helps. Nowhere's near sufficient though. And then you can see in K3 and pre-K, that could support some additional programs. So we're excited about applying for additional programs, and the superintendent's already launched those conversations in the district. And then restoring cash balance, whatever it ends up being is relative pieces. If it's $5 million, that's almost a couple $100,000 for us. We lost $1.9 million. If it's $15 million, it would be more meaningful. That would be closer to $600,000. So we'd be grateful to receive that. All right, moving on.
Please.
So the last slide is the special capital outlay, which we've discussed a number of times with the board. And you can see the amount we requested and the amount that we received in the allocation, and then the allocations for ND&I and Turquoise Trail that were provided. Superintendent may want to say more about this, but for our allocations, all I can say is that Ms. Siegel and I were disappointed. However, one of the things that in the mix, especially based on everything that's happening in school security, is the process for special capital outlay is tedious and long. And the fastest we've experienced is the amount that was submitted for the tennis courts at Santa Fe High, and that took us about a year and a half. So there's other options that we're considering for that, but I think by and large we'd say we're disappointed with what we received and kind of stopped
Vice
there.
President Cashman?
Just out of curiosity, do we know who funded elementary school improvements for Turquoise Trail and what those improvements might be?
Madam President, board member, superintendent, the way it normally works is the delegation gets together, they look at all the requests, and they each put in a little bit of money in order to fund the requests. And so probably quite a few of them did. But it's not a transparent system, so it's not publicly announced who put in how much.
Is that really true?
That is really true. There have been several bills over the years to try to make transparent who gives what money to each capital outlay project. Now, the legislators themselves will tell you, oh, I put in X amount or whatever. Most of them will, but it's not, you can't go get an information, an IPRA, and find out who gave for which capital.
With public money.
Right.
Vice President Cashman.
And
oh, I'm sorry. It was Board Member Carrillo first.
Oh. What is EDCS? Should I know that?
El Dorado.
Oh.
Right. El Dorado.
Isn't El Dorado all one word out there?
It's a community school, so that's
Well, yeah, but is it El Dorado?
It's El Dorado.
I always think of it as like the hotel where it's just all one. All right.
Vice President Cashman.
And once again, for all the people out in El Dorado that are watching, I would again like to thank Representative Matt McQueen for funding that request that we asked him to do for the school. This is going to help keep those kids safer while we wait for a law enforcement response if we ever needed it, and hopefully the board can fund and find the funding somewhere for the rest of our schools in Santa Fe. But I do want to thank Representative McQueen again, and so please, when you see him out there shopping, stop and say thank you.
And Madam President, the $25,000 came from Senator Stefanik.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Board Member Carrillo.
So this is good. I'm glad that the kids in El Dorado can be safe, but the rest of us may not just have that. That's cool. So I'm thinking, though, that and maybe this is something or maybe for discussion at tomorrow's CRC meeting, looking at, great, we're thinking the same thing, contingency and stuff like that. So especially in light of what's happened in this country in the last...
CDC, you're saying you're going to look at where we might be able to find some more money to do this?
In CRC?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Okay, thanks.
Board Member Garcia.
Linda, the $25,000 that Senator Liz Stefanik gave to the schools, where is that emergency backup power system going? Carl, Christie?
Here.
That's what I thought. I just want to make sure.
Well, kind of mobile, right? Mobile.
All right.
And President Price, just a couple other follow-up comments. SB 9, which the voters just approved, also can support security systems, and that effort is underway. And the effort for NDI was brought to the superintendent some months ago in discussions, and we'll be supporting them in the administration of the application and the reimbursement of the funds. The elementary school improvements at Turquoise Trail was a total surprise.
Thank you.
I think that's it.
So
Board Member Garcia.
So just, if you see Senator Stefanik out there, thank her for all the people that are watching in the district, because she actually did appropriate money for the schools. So when you see her shopping, please thank her as well, because she actually does a great job, and she thinks of our schools, obviously.
Ditto. Thanks, Senator Stefanik, please. Yeah, where do you shop? So we can find her and thank her.
And President Price, members of the board, Superintendent Garcia, I certainly wanted to echo what the superintendent said about all the work that Ms. Siegel has done. She's definitely proves herself year after year as being the finest lobbyist in the entire building, and we're fortunate to have her working with us.
Yes, we are.
Thank you, Ms. Siegel.
Thank both of you for your wonderful presentation. Thank you. Moving on, we have an action item. District 4 committee appointee to audit committee.
Madam Chair, board members, I don't have anybody for that, so I'd like to request tabling of that.
Are you District 4?
Yes.
Okay.
So move to table?
You don't have anyone yet?
Nope.
Okay, we'll table it. I thought that, I
Didn't have one.
It's been,
It's
yeah.
been vacant for quite some time.
Okay. All right, so moving on to board discussion. Vice President Cashman.
Okay, I have on here staff recognition, and I know we've talked about it before, but I did receive a call, and it wasn't just one person, but saying, you know, sometimes when we're sitting up here, it doesn't sound like we're supporting our staff out in the schools. And I told the person that called, I said, I don't think there's one board member that doesn't feel grateful for everything that's happening out in our schools and our staff. But I will, and I said, you know, I'm sorry if I've ever used harsh language, you know, about our teachers or that. But, you know, I think I also explained to the person that called is, you know, we support our staff in that, but sometimes when we say, like, you know, I said, well, let's move the needle faster, let's get a fire lit underneath us. It's not that I'm not supporting the staff, it's that we just need to make some changes. But because of that, I thought maybe it's good, again, to revisit how we recognize our staff. I know the superintendent does a great job at that level, but how do we as a board recognize? I know what I do for District 2, and I don't know if it's effective or not, but occasionally I'll send an email or a Hallmark e-card to my district people saying, thanks, I know you just got ready for park, and, thank you for doing all the things. But, I asked the person that called, do you have any concrete suggestions on how we could recognize, because we don't have money either, how could we? And they said, well, no, but just be kinder in your language. I said, okay, we'll try to do that. But I guess why I wanted to bring it up is in case the board had any ideas, or people that are listening have any ideas on how the board, some people say, okay, a thank you letter is nice. I think last year when Secretary Noble proposed maybe giving certificates, and the superintendent did personalized certificates. But I'm willing, as a board member, if any of the other board members, and again, I'll make that offer again, I can either show you how to format something to send out to your district employees, or if you say, hey, I don't have the time, but I'd like to do it, I'm also willing to say, I'll take that on as a responsibility. But we may have some great ideas. I know we've talked about this for many different years. How do we recognize and say thank you to everyone, from the bus drivers to the janitors to the secretaries to the EAs to the principals to the teachers. I mean, and I know I'm forgetting categories of employees, but we've, how could we as a board, and, so if I just wanted to bring it up in case somebody has a brainstorm and says, I got the perfect solution. Okay.
Just a second. Good. Dr. Garcia?
Madam President, members of the board, I've had conversations with staff and our team on that as we continue to work on the resolution, and with Ms. Mayor, and we're actually going to survey staff to find out what is meaningful to them, because different people, some really like that certificate, others didn't even ask to have it printed. It just is, it's a range. Some really would like us to try to work with the community to get gift cards, others not so much. We've tossed around ideas of, first year, 5-year, 10-year dinners, where we've asked some of our corporate sponsors who are interested in helping us with that. So we'd be happy to share that information with you of what we get back on that survey, and perhaps there's something there that you might be interested in pursuing. We are going to do the certificates again this year. It was easy enough to do, and many people did print them and have them put up in their offices and whatnot. So we'll share the results of that with you if you find that helpful.
I would find that helpful. Thank you. Board Member Carrillo.
I have a board item, but also what Maureen was talking about. Angels Night Out. Angels Night Out here is when all the a lot of proceeds from restaurants goes to Food Depot. Santa Fe Public Schools Night Out. I mean, every time I've ever asked, and Alma can attest to this, anytime I've ever asked a restaurant for a gift certificate, whether it's for the retiree dinner, whatever it's for, they always say yes. They're always happy to give to the schools. So that could be something, and yeah, Teachers Night Out.
That sounds like a very good idea. And I would also like to say that when I mentioned last week how much I appreciate the work that's done by the people that work in the district, I neglected to mention the 3 that I champion all the time, and that's librarians, nurses, and counselors. It was just a slip on my part.
And one of the things that I thought we as a board, and it's just something for you to mull over and to give our budget people a heads up. But again, even though we know our employees are going to get some type of pay raise, I would hope that we could be supportive again, as Board Member Carrillo said, and whatever their health insurance cost is, that we continue to fund that, so it's not that we give with one hand and we take it with the other. So I just think about it, but I have a list of budget priorities, and that is one of my budget priorities, again, is to try to say that's something that we need to do.
May I ask also if the board, if they may, because we get into negotiations and NEA, wants to negotiate, as does our other union. I always get the initials backwards. AFT, ATF, AFT.
AFT.
And ATF? AFT, right?
It's AFT.
As I'm dyslexic. So anyway, so these pieces are all negotiation pieces, but when we just automatically put it in the budget, then I have to scramble other places to find to negotiate. So just food for thought.
Okay. Board Member Carrillo.
First, building it's always been the wish of this board, and they can tell you otherwise, to always hold them harmless on health. I can't see us not doing that.
As long as we can.
Yeah, as long as we can. So, do you have any more? Okay, so.
So if you come up with, or you need help,
I did
and
come up with it.
yeah, I mean,
Okay.
but if you want to
Yeah.
also send, thank you notes to your people in your district, and,
Yeah.
I'm more than willing to work with anybody on that.
Okay, so what I'd like to add to the agenda for the 27th in our Finance Committee meeting as an action item, and it needs to be then because it's very timely, is I will write a resolution supporting our principals and our kids, supporting our kids and our principals in supporting them in a 17-minute walkout on March 14th. Don't give me that face. It's happening all over the country. No, the 24th is a march that's happening on Saturday, but on the March 14th is a student walkout, 17 minutes all over the country. And so I'd like us to, I'll write a resolution in support of that. And then maybe thematically, so you know what I'm working on. Love your kids more than your guns. I can't take credit for that. It was on a sign in Parkdale, Florida. One of the kids had it. But I think it's thematically a great way to go. And so I'm working with Miranda Viscoli right now, and so the idea is around assisting our young people to take the next step. Because, I mean, Lorraine, how many marches, and you and I, we've been around, but there's a point at which you can only march so much, there needs to be an action behind it. These things that are visual are great, but they're first steps if there's no follow-up. So it's got to be a kid-driven campaign, and I'm sure there are some adults in Florida that are helping guide the process so they can, in Florida today.
They're supporting, not guiding.
Supporting, right. In Florida today, after all of this, they voted down a ban on assault weapons.
Yes.
You'd got to expect that from Florida, right? But anyway, so I'll introduce a resolution. It'll be an action item, and it's around supporting the kids and walking out for 17 minutes.
I just want to say, okay, any of the walkouts I participated in when I was in high school, in fact, I set up, right next to us was Chase Manhattan Bank. And my school started at 7 o'clock in the morning, and since there were 9,000 of us, we went till 5 o'clock. So I set up a walkout and picket around Chase Manhattan Bank against apartheid, because Chase Manhattan spent money in South Africa when a lot of banks were boycotting. I didn't ask adults for any help. We did it. And I don't think this is something that we should lead. I think they should lead.
Oh, I agree completely. But I want to make sure the principals are supportive.
So what I want to say, and I have to give you my grown-up voice here, and I'm sorry. So I'm going to, here's the issue.
Why are you sorry?
Well, I am sorry because it's not supporting necessarily what you want, and that is that I do have concerns about us sanctioning the kids leaving for 17 minutes. I can't supervise all of the kids. What age group are we talking about? What happens if somebody gets hurt? or, I mean, there's just a whole bunch of liability issues. And, you know, this has been brought to my attention also by some teachers talking about, could there be something at lunch? Can we work out some way for them to participate in that and still keep them safe? Because there are quite a few liability concerns. And that was a reason also when we had our rally, how we did it, how the parents had to give permission. It was in school time. So I just, you know, just doing my job, I'm just going to tell you, and then whatever the board wants to do, you'll do. But just food for thought, okay?
All right, and food for thought, it's going in, it's been digested, now it's out. And, but, you know, but, I mean, essentially, principals are going to guide what they need to do at their schools. You know, at the L's, I mean, elementaries, you know, they can guide what it's going to be at their school, and they know what best to do. And also to make sure that kids don't, at least at our high schools, don't think of it as an invitation to leave for the day.
Well, they do, I mean, they do take direction from me, the principals do.
Yeah. Well, no, I understand that. I think it'd be a real shame if this district did not jump on board with districts all over the country that are supporting this effort.
There's a way to do it.
Yeah.
Vice President Cashman?
So is it okay to put that on the agenda? We're good with that?
Yeah, if you're
All right.
going to put it on the agenda, because I want to discuss it, because I am also concerned about liability and keeping our kids safe. So, you know, even if it's a walkout, it might be a walkout of class, but still on campus, but I think we need to see what the resolution says, because you know, we don't want something to happen to our kids.
I just wanted to say that the picket line that I set up, which went on for quite a while, the principal at the high school threatened to see to it that I would never be accepted to any school that was accredited, any college or university that was accredited. So I went and called my mother. I called the New York Times, the Herald Tribune, the New York Post, the Daily News, and I called our local school board. We had local school boards back then, and then the big school board in New York City. And so my mother and one of the journalists and the president of the school board came down to talk to the principal. He denied he said that to me, and he said he would write me a letter to any school in the United States of America and see to it that I got in. So I did that on my own. I did so, and then I called for support. Okay? All right. Is there anything on advanced planning? Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Garcia? The other Dr. Garcia?
No, I mean, I don't want to be a doctor.
He doesn't want to be part of it.
I was just wondering is there some sort of policy we have regarding security issues, or can I get a copy of that, or I don't know, passing a resolution with all the stuff happening throughout the country? I don't know.
Could you be more specific?
I guess what I'm asking is, what's the protocol if something unfortunately does happen at our schools? Do we work with, obviously, the police department?
So we have
SWAT
several
team?
protocols. We could, I could either do a briefing for you, or if it's the pleasure of the board, Mr. Romero can talk about it. But we've done this, I mean, I'm seeing here,
Could you give him a copy of the flip chart?
We can go over, there's all kinds of drills, all kinds of procedures. One of the issues that we will be bringing to the board at some time after we get our new Director of Safety and Security on board, we've had many parents, and there's different opinions on this, on active shooter training. Mm-hmm. And there are pros and cons on training children and what age group on active shooter training. Other than that, everything else, we have safety protocols and drills in place. We have protocols in place with the city police, the state police, the county, not only for that sort of thing, but a hazardous spill. We do drills of all kinds. We have control center. So we'll go over all of that with you.
We even did a drill one time at Capitol. What if a small plane, since we were so next to the airport, what if a small plane crashed into Capitol?
So I guess just really quick, I just been throwing this out there. You ask almost 10 out of 10 parents if they would mind if their student walked through a metal detector every single day, and their answer is no. And I'm just wondering, in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, how do we get there, or do we need to get there? Just
And you have to kind of look at the data on that, especially the way that our buildings are, they don't always provide the security that you think they do. It's almost counterintuitive, but certainly we'll look at all those things. Absolutely.
Vice President Cashman?
And I just, because we have an audience that may not have seen what happened, but I do know that the superintendent and her staff already went and talked with Ms. Rainbow about the security issues that she brought up. So I don't know how you're going to resolve it, but I thank you for talking with her right away about that, because we do take security seriously, and I think that every parent has received some sort of robocall before all of this happened from the district on security. And so it's just a constant thing that we have to monitor.
All right. Any other comments before we move on to advanced planning? Any changes in advanced planning? Oh, then the heavy task falls on me to adjourn this meeting.
Wait, Steve's this next to you.
57 seconds. Minute 57? No, 57.
I didn't want to say exactly how we were going to be monitoring, because...
Yes. Yes.